This is the introduction to Module 1 on climate change and sustainable development. Climate change is by far the biggest issue of our lifetime. It trickles down into many, many other environmental issues, and it impacts everyone, but it impacts poor people and marginalized people more than everyone else. We will talk about that more in a minute. This module will cover climate change, its environmental impacts, and its social impacts. We'll examine our contributions to climate change from our personal lifestyles, and then we will look at some approaches to mitigate or adapt to the impacts of climate change. So why should we care about climate change? As you can see from this chart pretty clearly, this is the rising global temperatures. And you can see that over the past 100 years, our temperatures have risen substantially, in some cases, on average, over 1 degree Celsius. And summer temperatures are getting hotter. This animation from 1951 to 1980 shows our summer temperatures. And then, of course, the highs from 94 to 2004 are hotter. And then even hotter still from 2005 to 2015. And the the 10 hottest years on record have been in about the last 12 years. So this is scientifically proven that our planet is warming, and we do have severe impacts from climate change, one of which is the sea ice extent in the Arctic. You can see the age of Arctic sea ice in 1984 and the amounts of Arctic sea ice in 1984 and then in 2018. And you can see how in just a couple of decades, how much the Arctic sea ice has decreased. So what does this mean? This means that the sea level is rising, and we don't live near the coast. Maybe it doesn't matter that much to us. But as you'll see in a minute, it really does matter, and it even impacts us in an inland setting. These are sea level forecasts that by 2100, the sea will rise at anywhere from 0.5 meter to 1 meter. 2200, it could rise 2 meters. 2300, it could be close to 3.5 meters. Once again, why do we care? Well, with a 5 meter rise, most of Boston will be underwater. Closer to home, in Charleston, a 2 meter rise shows that a good bit of Charleston will be underwater as well. Remember, that's a 2 meter rise, and that could happen in 150 years. Wrightsville Beach, a good bit of that will be underwater as well. One of our favorite places to go, Topsail Beach, with a 1 meter rise. Remember, that's by the end of this century, a good bit of Topsail Beach will be underwater. So that impacts our coasts. But even if we say, oh, that doesn't matter that much, this chart from the New York Times shows the decline in agriculture yields. So we start shifting from, well, we lost some beaches, we lost some coastal towns, to saying, is this going to really affect our food supply? And if so, how? And what's that mean for the well-being of life on Earth? It is quite concerning. Additionally, wildfires have increased in frequency and intensity as a result of global climate change. That hasn't necessarily affected us much in North Carolina yet, but it has affected communities all over the West Coast. Hurricanes and flooding. Now that does impact us substantially here in North Carolina. And what we find is that the hurricanes may impact the coastal communities, but the flooding impacts a good bit of the eastern part of our state. And what we also find is that the lower income communities tend to live at lower elevations, partly because that land is not valued as high. And so they flood over and over. And it's a cycle that of these towns flooding, trying to dry out, not being able to afford homeowners insurance that would cover the impacts of the flooding, because they've spent so much money trying to dry out and possibly move houses onto higher ground. So this is where we start to see that it's not just the beaches that will lose, but it's entire communities. This is a graphic generated by the Union of Concerned Scientists showing how many thousands of homes will be affected by inundation in 2100. And I venture to say that will likely be, if not in your lifetime, in your children's lifetime. So let's back out of this and kind of see how we, as in the US and other countries around the world, how we contribute to climate change as well as other types of ecological degradation. There's a concept called the ecological footprint, and this measures how fast we consume resources and how quickly we generate waste. And carbon footprint is part of this, because carbon footprint does contribute to ecological footprint. Additionally, the energy we use, the way we live, the timber and paper we use, the food and fiber we consume, the seafood we consume, all of these things contribute to our ecological footprint. So in this module, we'll look at our own ecological footprints using the Global Footprint Network's ecological footprint calculator. I did this, and if everyone in the US lived like me, we would need 2.4 Earths to sustain my lifestyle. We all know there's only one Earth, right? So, so this is a problem. And I like to think that I walk the talk and live relatively sustainably. I drive my Prius, I recycle, I reuse, I try not to create waste. I eat responsibly. I avoid beef and pork, but still, I don't do well enough to sustain life on Earth. So these are more stats for my footprint, and you can see that my carbon footprint is a good portion of my ecological footprint. So we'll be talking about carbon footprints throughout this course, but particularly in the module 1. So this graph shows the number of Earths. Remember, there's only one, but the number of Earths and its resources that would be needed if the world's population lived like us. We are by far the most consumptive country. We would need 5 Earths if the world's population lived like us. Going down here, Australia's right behind, Russia, Germany, Switzerland, Japan, etc., getting better and better and better. India is doing better than all of us. The population of India is living relatively sustainably. At the same time, you could say that they do not have or enjoy the standard of living that we have. On average, we need 1.75 Earths to get what we need as a population, what we consume as a population, not what we need, but what we consume as a population right now. So there's a concept called sustainable development. It's also the title of this course. Development that meets the needs of the present, in other words, that meets our needs, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So how we live now should not compromise the ability of our grandchildren to meet their own needs. That's the definition of sustainable development. So the United Nations Environmental Program came up with Sustainable Development Goals back in 2012 at the Sustainable Development Conference in Brazil. And these sustainable development goals range from from poverty to hunger to health and well-being to economic growth, affordable and clean energy, climate action, responsible consumption, etc. You will have the whole document at your fingertips, and you're welcome to read as much or as little of it as you'd like. We in this class will focus on the sustainable development goals that are not grayed out in this image. So clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, water, land. These are the areas in which we will focus in this particular class. In this module, of course, we will focus on climate change. So the book and the website Drawdown was started by Paul Hawken, who worked with hundreds of experts in areas that could offer climate solutions. And I think what you'll see when you page through this website and through the book, the ebook, is that there is a very broad array of professions that can and do address climate change, either climate adaptation or climate mitigation. So the Drawdown website and book are organized into these categories: electricity, food and agriculture, industry, transportation, buildings, health and education, land sinks, coastal and ocean sinks, and engineered sinks. We will touch on all of these categories during this course, but for this module, we'll just sort of look over these things and kind of review them lightly for now. But I want to give you an example of one of the strategies to address climate change, and that has to do with coastal wetland restoration. Wetlands do a lot of things. They clean water, they sequester carbon, they protect development on the shore, they mitigate large storms that come blowing in the form of hurricanes or just large storms. So protecting coastal wetlands is really a key move when it comes to climate change. So one profession that deals with protecting coastal wetlands is the profession of landscape architecture, and that is my profession. You will hear about this and many other professions over the course of the semester. This is some work in coastal protection, and then also the integration of people and recreation into these coastal landscapes. These are by some graduate students. And the idea here is that in addition to protecting these coastal wetlands, we can also use them for recreation, for physical fitness, for health and well-being, just for enjoying being outside in these ecosystems. But they can also do their mitigation of climate change if we keep them healthy and if we protect them, and in some cases, restore them. So landscape architects might consult on these types of projects with civil engineers, ecologists, and oceanographers, and ocean health experts. So a lot of professions will come together to consult on these types of projects. So that's just an overview of what we'll be covering in Module 1. I draw your attention to the Module 1 objectives. First, describing environmental and social impacts from climate change, discussing the basic futures of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, recalling strategies to address climate change from the book and website Drawdown, identifying the broad array of careers that address climate change, and we'll be mostly identifying that in Drawdown, and discussing issues of social equity from the impacts of climate change. I hope you enjoy this module.